This torn-up passport. You think you're flying Ether Sky first class? You'd be better off catching the next bus back to whatever village you came from. The passport hit the floor between polished leather shoes ripped clean in half. Sana simply bent down, picked it up, brushed off the dust. No yelling. No flinching. She tapped her phone and made a short call. Terminate the staff at counter 3. Reason insulting the owner. 3 seconds later, an emergency chime echoed across the terminal. The operations director's voice rang out over the loudspeakers. Faye Delmore and Marvin Rice. You are hereby suspended, effective immediately. Silence spread. Sana looked up, eyes cold. You tore my passport. And in doing so, you just tore up your careers. I'm Sana Eloran, the new owner of Ether Sky. Sana stood there, her plain gray sweater slightly frayed at the cuffs, her old backpack slung over one shoulder. The terminal buzzed with whispers, but she didn't move. Her face stayed calm, almost too calm, like she'd been through worse and come out standing. The crowd didn't know what to do. Some stared at their phones, others shuffled their feet, avoiding her gaze. Faye, the check-in clerk, with her crisp Ether Sky blazer and fake smile, stood frozen, her hands still gripping the edge of the counter. Marvin, the manager, his tie loosened and his face red, looked like he'd been slapped. Sanaa didn't say another word. She just slipped the torn passport into her bag, zipped it shut, and walked toward the escalator. The sound of her sneakers on the tile was the only thing cutting through the stunned silence. It started earlier that morning when Sana walked into the airport. She'd come straight from a long drive, her jeans dusted with road dirt, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. The terminal was all glass and chrome, filled with people in sharp suits and designer bags, the kind who glanced at her and then looked away like she didn't belong. She carried that old backpack, the one she'd had since college, its straps worn thin. Her passport was tucked inside, a little creased, but still valid. She stepped up to the first-class check-in counter, her boarding pass already printed. Faye was there, her nails painted bright red, her eyes scanning Sana like she was sizing up a stray dog. Next, Faye called, barely looking up. Sanaya slid her passport across the counter. That's when it started. Faye flipped open the passport, her lips curling into a smirk. This thing's falling apart, she said loud enough for the people in line to hear. A guy in a tailored suit, his watch glinting under the lights, chuckled. What did you dig that out of a thrift store? He muttered to the woman next to him, who laughed behind her manicured hand. Faye held the passport up, letting it dangle like a piece of trash. You sure you're in the right line, honey? This is first class. You know, for people who can afford it. The words landed like a slap, but Sana didn't flinch. She just looked at Faye, her eyes steady. Check the boarding pass, she said, her voice low but clear. Faye snorted, tossing the passport back. I don't need to. This says it all. A desk supervisor, a woman named Carol with a headset askew and a perpetual look of exhaustion, walked past the counter, pausing just long enough to hear Faye's snide remark about thrift stores and first-class eligibility. Carol didn't intervene, didn't offer a correcting glance, or even acknowledge the humiliation unfolding in her jurisdiction. Instead, she leaned slightly over the counter, scanned the queue, and gave Faye a barely perceptible nod of approval, a silent transactional confirmation that the abuse was acceptable, even encouraged, as long as the line moved and the perceived riffraff were deterred. This silent institutional complicity solidified the feeling of isolation. For Sana, confirming that the problem wasn't just Faye's bad attitude, but a deeply rooted culture of entitlement within the entire operation, where staff felt empowered to judge and dismiss based on appearance, protected by the indifference of their immediate management. Carol adjusted her headset, gave a tired, dismissive wave toward the line, and walked away, leaving Faye emboldened to continue the attack with fresh vigor and the full unspoken permission of the Ether Sky corporate hierarchy. Marvin strutted over his polished shoes, clicking his badge, gleaming like it gave him power over the world. He was the kind of guy who loved his title, loved the way people straightened up when he walked by. What's the holdup? He barked, glancing at Sana. His eyes narrowed, taking in her plain clothes, her scuffed sneakers. Oh, I see. Miss, this isn't the budget terminal. You want the discount airlines? They're across the way. The crowd laughed again, louder this time. A woman in a fur-trimmed coat, her perfume sharp enough to choke, leaned forward. Some people have no shame trying to sneak into first class like that, she said, her voice dripping with fake pity. Sana's fingers tightened on her backpack strap just for a second. I'm where I need to be, she said, not loud but firm. The room didn't listen. Marvin, sensing the need to escalate the performance for the benefit of the watching first-class passengers, placed his hands on the counter and addressed Sana with a low, menacing intensity that belied his professional veneer. Fine, if you claim to be flying first class with that document, you'll have to comply with a manual security audit. That means a non-refundable administrative processing fee of $200 for expedited manual verification, payable only in certified bank drafts, to cover the cost of manually cross-referencing this suspiciously worn passport against our priority traveler database. Furthermore, you will need to produce proof of residence and a notarized letter confirming the legitimacy of your travel itinerary, or we'll have to treat this as an attempted security breach and deny boarding entirely. He didn't wait for a response, pulling a worn, official-looking form from beneath the counter and slamming it down, a gesture that was purely intended to create an insurmountable bureaucratic obstacle designed to shame her into retreating, knowing full well the arbitrary demands were impossible to meet under airport time constraints. His eyes, glinting with malicious satisfaction, swept across the line, silently soliciting confirmation from the other well-dressed travelers that he was merely enforcing necessary, if stringent, rules on an undesirable interloper. Faye grabbed the passport again, this time with a flourish like she was putting on a show. "Let's be real," she said, her voice sharp. "This passport, you think you're flying Ether Sky first class? You'd be better off catching the next bus back to whatever village you came from." She tore the corner of the passport just a small rip, but the sound was like a gunshot. The crowd went quiet, waiting to see what Sana would do. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She just watched Faye, her face unreadable. Then she bent down, picked up the torn piece and tucked it into her pocket. "You shouldn't have done that," she said, her voice so soft it barely carried. But it carried enough. Faye laughed, nervous now, and ripped the passport clean in half. Just as the torn pieces fluttered to the marble floor, a uniformed security officer posted 20 yards away near the automated gates glanced over, registering the commotion, the gasps, the manager's aggressive posture, the check-in agent's triumphant sneer, and the quiet figure of Sana bending over the counter. The officer, whose duty was explicitly to prevent any disturbance that might compromise passenger safety, watched for a full uncomfortable 30 seconds as Marvin and Faye continued their public shaming ritual, seemingly weighing the inconvenience of intervening against the sheer entertainment value of the spectacle. With a barely perceptible sigh of boredom, the guard adjusted the heavy utility belt, pulled a crumpled food wrapper from his pocket, tossed it casually into a nearby bin without breaking stride, and turned his back on the scene, walking deliberately toward the concourse shops. The silent, calculated dismissal of the injustice by the very person meant to uphold order was a profound moment of abandonment, a stark confirmation to Sana that the structure of authority was not just complicit, but actively preferred the comfort of its powerful patrons over the dignity of a single non-compliant traveler. The crowd gasped, some pulling out their phones to record. A man in a silk tie, his hair slicked back, shouted, "Get her out of here! She's probably not even legal." Another, a woman with a designer handbag, added, "This is why they need stricter rules. People like her ruin everything." Sana stood still, her hands steady as she zipped her backpack shut. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than their words. Marvin stepped closer, his chest puffed out. "You're done here," he said. "Take your bag and go before we call security." Sanaya tilted her head just slightly. "Call them," she said. 2 words. The room went cold. Security came fast. 2 guys in stiff uniforms, one with a coffee stain on his shirt. They grabbed Sana's arm, not hard but enough to make a point. She didn't resist. She just walked with them, her steps, even her face, calm. The crowd parted, some Sikhs still filming, others whispering, "Bet she's got something illegal in that bag." A guy in a polo shirt muttered, his voice smug. The security room was small, all concrete and flickering lights. They tossed her backpack onto a metal table, and it spilled open a comb with a broken tooth, a worn notebook, a single key on a plain ring. The officer with the coffee stain laughed. "This is your life savings, huh?" He poured his coffee over her boarding pass, letting it soak through. Sana didn't move. She just watched the paper curl. The security officer, satisfied with the destruction of the boarding pass, leaned aggressively across the table, his breath smelling faintly of stale coffee and desperation, and began a vicious, baseless line of questioning, far exceeding his authority. "Listen, Sana Aloran. That name's too clean for a passport that looks like it's been through a war zone. I'm guessing that passport number is fake. That ticket was stolen, or that name belongs to someone who actually matters. Which one is it? Are you running from something? Are you carrying something you shouldn't? We're going to hold you here until we get a clean match, and frankly, everything about you screams misidentification, from those shoes to that cheap sweater. You think you can just walk into an international hub and demand passage with half a document and an attitude of silence. Start talking, or we make sure this little trip ends with a very long conversation with federal agents who won't be as polite as I am. His partner stood by the door, arms crossed, offering a low, intimidating chuckle, reinforcing the deliberate psychological attempt to break her down. Marvin stormed in his face redder now. "You think you can mess with our system?" he shouted. "You think you can walk in here looking like that and shut down our check-in?" The monitors in the room were flashing red error messages, scrolling across every screen. Flights delayed. Systems down. The whole terminal was frozen. Faye leaned in her voice, a harsh whisper. "She's probably some hacker thinking she's clever. Look at her. Homeless, probably." Sana sat back in the chair, her hands folded. "You don't know who I am," she said, not to Faye, not to Marvin, just to the air. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a plea. It was a fact. As Marvin paused to wipe sweat from his brow, distracted by the continuous shrill beeping of the system, failure, Sana's left hand, which had been resting casually on the metal table, subtly shifted an inch closer to the small, dusty laptop that security had pulled from her backpack. Without changing her calm, neutral expression and relying purely on muscle memory and the millisecond of distraction from the manager, she extended a single deliberate finger and tapped the tiny, almost invisible rubberized button positioned just beneath the screen's bezel, a custom-installed zero-latency trigger linked to a remote command. That silent, infinitesimal action was the true moment of the system's demise. It wasn't the noise and shouting that caused the terminal chaos, but this surgical, almost spiritual exercise of power, confirming that she was neither a hacker nor a victim, but the source of the paralysis they desperately sought to control. The errors scrolling across the room's monitors shifted from generic system faults to specific high-priority database integrity warnings. A subtle cue only a trained eye would recognize, announcing that the heart of EtherSky's operational data was now being intentionally and methodically quarantined by its new unseen master. Years ago, Sana sat in a different kind of room, wood-paneled heavy with the smell of old books. Her father, a man whose name opened doors, stood over her, his voice low but firm. "You don't need to prove yourself to anyone." He set his hands on her shoulders. "You carry our name. That's enough." She was 16, her hair in a tight braid, her dress plain, even then. She nodded, but her eyes were on the window where a black car waited to take her to another lesson. Another test. Discipline. Restraint. Power held quiet. That's what she learned. Not to shout, not to flaunt, but to stand still and let the world come to her. Now in the security room, that lesson held her steady. A phone rang sharp and loud, cutting through Marvin's shouting. The officer answered, his face tightening as he listened. He hung up and looked at Marvin, his voice low. "It's the board. They're saying stop everything." She's the one?" Marvin laughed short and sharp. "The one? What, the hacker?" The officer shook his head, his hands shaking as he handed over a tablet. A document was open, a contract with a name in bold, Sana Eloran Holdings. Faye's mouth dropped open, her red nails digging into the table. Marvin's laugh died in his throat. Sana didn't look at the tablet. She didn't need to. She just picked up her comb, tucked it back into her bag, and stood. The security officer, whose coffee had ruined the boarding pass moments before, suddenly let the tablet clatter onto the metal desk and scrambled frantically to retrieve the stained, curled paper. With a desperate theatrical attempt at damage control, he snatched a handful of paper towels from a dispenser and began awkwardly dabbing at the soaked paper, his hands trembling so violently that he smeared the coffee grounds rather than cleaning them, transforming the act of vandalism into a pathetic, rushed attempt at remediation. His eyes darting between the name Sana Eloran on the screen and her calm, unmoving figure were wide with a terror that transcended fear of being fired. It was the abject realization of having physically insulted an untouchable, a gesture of groveling that was too late and utterly useless. He muttered apologies under his breath, barely audible as he destroyed the boarding pass further. A man physically shrinking in the face of his catastrophic mistake, while Sana watched the spectacle of his self-inflicted humiliation with an unblinking neutral gaze. The door swung open and Lucian Hartwell walked in. He was 50 gray at the temples, his suit cut sharp but his eyes tired. The former chairman of Ether Sky, the man who'd built it from nothing, now stepping aside for the new owner. He looked at Sana, his voice quiet but clear. "Mrs. Eloran, we've been waiting for you upstairs." The room froze. Faye's face went white, her hands trembling. Marvin took a step back, his badge suddenly looking small. The crowd outside the glass door, still watching, went silent. Sana nodded just once and followed Lucian. Her sneakers didn't make a sound. Marvin recovered first, his voice loud but shaky. "This is a mistake," he said, following her out. "She can't be the investor. Look at her." Faye chimed in, her voice high and desperate. "Maybe she stole someone's identity. You can't trust people like that." A man in the crowd, his Rolex catching the light, shouted, "No way she owns anything. This is a scam." Sana kept walking, her backpack bouncing lightly against her shoulder. She didn't turn, didn't argue, but her steps were steady, each one like a drum beat. The crowd parted again, their phones still out, but now the whispers were different. One nervous, uncertain. As Sana and Lucien moved toward the escalator, Marvin, in a final panic display of baseless authority, surged forward and attempted to plant himself directly in their path, using his body as a physical barrier in the middle of the crowded concourse. "Sir, I must advise against this. I need to confirm her credentials personally. This is a security risk." He stammered, his arms held awkwardly wide. Lucian Hartwell, without breaking his composed stride or even making eye contact with the flailing manager, simply extended his arm laterally and placed a firm, non-violent hand on Marvin's chest. The contact wasn't a shove, but a definitive, immovable roadblock, delivering a silent message of absolute non-negotiable power. You no longer exist in this equation. Marvin stumbled backward 2 full steps, his face registering a mixture of shock and physical defeat, watching helplessly as the 2 figures ascended the escalator. A man who had just used his final pathetic reserve of resistance and had been effortlessly swept aside like debris. Upstairs in a glass-walled office, Lucien handed Sana a folder. "The transition's complete," he said. "You're in charge now." She opened it, her eyes scanning the pages. Her name was there, tied to billions, to power, to a company that moved people across the world. She closed the folder, her hands steady. "I didn't want it to go like this," she said, her voice soft but firm. Lucian nodded, his face unreadable. "They didn't give you a choice." Outside the terminal was chaos. Screens still flashed red. Passengers milled around confused, and somewhere a printer whirred, spitting out a page with her name in bold. Just as Sana turned away from the panoramic window, a figure detached itself from the gawking crowd, below renowned filmmaker and notoriously private traveler, Alistair Vance, whose documentary production company was Ether Sky's most lucrative corporate client. Alistair, dressed in simple black travel gear, but instantly recognizable, took the ascending escalator, ignoring the reporters, and approached the glass-walled office with a genuine expression of admiration and disapproval. He didn't ask for a favor or offer a card, but spoke clearly, his voice carrying surprising authority. Eloran had witnessed the entire debacle. That wasn't just a breach of service, it was a profound failure of human dignity. I want you to know that there are clients here, the ones who value substance over spectacle, who applaud your response. I was about to cancel our entire 6-month charter agreement, disgusted by the culture I saw today. Now I'll double it. Clean house. The industry needs this kind of uncompromising truth. This powerful, unsolicited endorsement from a high-profile industry veteran gave immediate external validation to Sana's actions, framing the morning's confrontation not as petty revenge, but as a necessary and justified corporate cleansing that resonated with the highest tier of clientele. Back downstairs, Marvin was shouting again, this time at a security officer. "Get her out of here! This is my airport." His voice cracked, his tie now completely undone. Faye was behind him, her mascara smudged her voice a whine. "She can't do this. She's nobody." Sana stopped at the top of the escalator, her hand on the railing. She pulled out her phone, opened an app, and typed a few words. The screens across the terminal flickered, then lit up with a new message. Marvin Rice and ground staff morning shift terminated. "Reason misconduct." The crowd gasped. Faye sank to her knees, her hands covering her face. Sana didn't look back. She walked toward the executive lounge, her steps unhurried. A woman in the crowd, the one with the fur-trimmed coat, tried to step forward, her voice sweet now. Ms. Lauren, I didn't mean anything by it. I'm sure we can work together. She held out a business card, her smile forced. Santa didn't take it. She just looked at the woman, her eyes calm but sharp. You laughed, she said. 2 words. The woman's smile fell, her card dropping to the floor. Santa kept walking, her backpack swinging lightly. The lounge doors slid open and she disappeared inside. The screens in the terminal changed again. A video played, grainy but clear. Faye tearing the passport, Marvin laughing, the crowd mocking. The system had recorded it all, flagged it as a violation against a VIP. The passengers who'd filmed earlier scrambled to delete their videos, their faces pale. One man, the guy with the silk tie, muttered, "This can't be happening." But it was. The news was already spreading. Phones buzzed with alerts. Ethersky's new owner, humiliated at check-in. The internet lit up, comments pouring in. Faye's name trended, her face plastered across every platform. Marvin's too. Their lives unraveling in real time. The man in the silk tie, the one who had earlier shouted, "Get her out of here. She's probably not even legal," was suddenly and violently yanked backward by the tailored sleeve of his jacket. His companion, a severe-looking woman, who appeared to be his senior partner or spouse, her face a mask of cold fury, began hissing at him with brutal efficiency, her voice a low, terrifying growl that carried no trace of the earlier manufactured pity. "You utter fool." That was Sana Lauren. Her holding company just liquidated our primary institutional investor last quarter. Do you have any idea what your public racist outburst just cost us? I warned you about the public behavior. I spent 6 months getting us a meeting with Hartwell, and you just screamed insults at the new CEO. You've destroyed our reputation in 30 seconds. The man instantly deflated his silk tie, suddenly feeling like a noose, his arrogant swagger replaced by the desperate, cringing fear of financial ruin, delivered by someone whose respect he genuinely craved. He watched aghast and silent as she pulled out her own phone and furiously typed a message, his humiliation complete and immediate broadcast silently to the remaining terrified travelers. Sana sat in the lounge, her backpack on the chair beside her. She pulled out the torn passport, smoothing it flat. The photo inside showed her at 20, her face younger, but just as serious. She'd been on a trip then, her first time leaving the country alone. Her father's voice came back unbidden. "You carry our name." She closed the passport, her fingers lingering on the torn edge. Lucian sat across from her, his hands folded. "What's your next move?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. She just looked out the window where planes sat still on the tarmac, their engines quiet. "Rebuild," she said finally. "Starting with trust." Marvin was outside now, on his knees in the terminal, his voice hoarse. "Please, Mrs. Lauren, I didn't know. I've got a family." Faye was next to him, sobbing. "I need this job. My kids." Her voice broke, her hands clutching at her blazer. A man in a suit, the one who'd offered his card earlier, stepped forward, his voice smooth. "Hey, I wasn't part of that, Ms. Lauren. I'm happy to discuss partnerships." Sana didn't look at them. She stood at the lounge window, her back to the crowd. Her phone buzzed a message from the board. "Stock withdrawal approved." She nodded just once and typed a reply. The screens flickered again. Ethersky to delist from stock exchange. Restructuring begins immediately. The terminal was a mess now. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing. One pushed through her microphone out. "Ms. Lauren, why didn't you tell them who you were?" Sanaya turned her eyes steady. "I don't talk. I watch." She held up the torn passport, the pieces catching the light. "This is how you measure a person." The crowd went silent, the cameras still rolling. The reporter tried again, her voice softer. "What's next for Ethersky?" Sana didn't answer. She just slipped the passport into her bag and turned away. The message was clear. She didn't know them words. Years ago, Sana stood in a different airport, smaller, quieter. Her father's driver dropped her off his car, a sleek black sedan that turned heads. She was 18, her backpack new, then her passport crisp. She'd looked at the ticket in her hand, her first solo flight. A woman at the counter had smiled, her voice kind. "You're going far, aren't you?" Sana had nodded, her throat tight. She'd been nervous, but she'd walked through that terminal like she belonged. Because she did. Now, standing in the lounge, she felt that same quiet strength. The world hadn't changed, but she had. The doors to the lounge opened again, and a man walked in. Tall, his pilot's uniform, crisp, his eyes warm but steady. Daniel, the chief pilot, a man who'd flown routes across the world and studied aviation engineering in his spare time. He'd been part of the deal, the one who'd connected Sana to the holding company. He didn't say much, just walked to her side and took her hand. "Ready to go?" he asked. She nodded, her fingers tightening around his. The crowd outside froze. Faye's sobs stopped. Marvin's head dropped. The man with the Rolex looked away, his hands in his pockets. Daniel's presence said it all. Sana wasn't alone. Never had been. They walked out together, past the crowd, past the cameras. The terminal was still chaos, but it parted for them. A new logo flashed on the screens. Airline Aviation. Their plane waited on the tarmac, a private jet, sleek and quiet. Sana didn't look back. She didn't need to. Standing at the aircraft steps, Daniel gave her a moment, and Sana paused, turning her gaze back toward the sprawling glass and chrome terminal, where a crowd of people were still staring rapt into the new Airline Aviation display. Instead of boarding immediately, she lifted her phone one last time, composing a final brief directive to her new communications team. Moments later, the massive digital advertising boards positioned high above the concourse, which had been displaying luxury watch ads, abruptly synchronized and changed to a single bold, white-on-black text message that encompassed the final lesson of the day: Airline Aviation Policy Update. Effective immediately, any employee who compromises the dignity or attempts to dictate the worth of a traveler based on appearance will face immediate non-appealable termination. We transport people, not costumes. The journey starts with respect. This was not an act of revenge, but a foundational public declaration of the company's new moral code, delivered not in a boardroom memo, but as a broadcast mandate, a final clear message to every remaining employee and every watching customer about the standards of the new owner. With the policy change confirmed on every screen, Sana finally stepped onto the plane, the message hanging heavy and absolute in the stunned silence of the terminal. The jet's engines hummed, the runway stretching out ahead. Sana looked out the window, her hand still in Daniel's. The terminal faded behind them, the screen still flashing her name. She'd come here to see the truth, to test the system she now owned. And she'd found it. People judged what they saw, not what was, but that was their mistake, not hers. She leaned back in her seat, the torn passport in her bag. It wasn't about revenge. It was about standing tall,